This nugget is the second in the series for project time management. This nugget is focused on project schedule management. Based on the PMBOK guide itself, this nugget is focused on the final aspect, which is control the schedule. It's all about understanding what a good schedule is. It's all about understanding the measures we as project managers need to put in place to ensure we have a good schedule in place. It's about tracking the status, understanding what time the team members have spent on the project to date, and understanding what their estimates to complete the work is going to be. It's about proactively managing the schedule, taking the information, plugging it back into the schedule, and proactively understanding and being able to accurately forecast what a revised completion date for the project is.
One of the most effective things you can do as a project manager to effectively manage your plan is to manage the critical path. What's the critical path? The critical path is the path through your project. I've shown here a dependency diagram again that has the longest duration, or that effectively determines the end date for your project. So we see we have three paths through our project. We have a path of 1, 2, 5, and 6, which has a duration of 12. 3 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2. We have another path through our project which is 1 to 3 to 6, which has a duration of 11. And a final path through our project which is 1 through 4, which is a duration of 7. So right now, our critical path is 1, 2, 5, and 6. Any change to the duration, any change to the schedule for tasks 1, 2, 5, or 6 will have an impact on our current end date. That is the critical path. As a project manager, you need to ensure that you're watching the critical path daily to ensure that you understand how each task in the critical path is doing, that you're conversing with the team, ensuring that there's nothing going to impact them from being successful completing their project, and that, in fact, our end date will be 12 days from project beginning. So manage the critical path carefully. But realize that there's other paths through the project. Tasks 1, 3 to 6 is very near to the critical path. You need to watch your near critical path tasks very carefully, simply because a unit change of 6 days to 7 days for task 3 would in fact make that path 12 as well, in which case you have two critical paths for your project. So if your tasks that are near the critical path, watch them carefully, because if tasks that are near change, in this case by as little as a day, it becomes a critical path shared path. If it changes by 2 days, it in fact becomes a new critical path for your project. Or conversely, if good news happens on 2 or 5 and they drop by a day or they drop by 2 days, it goes from 12 to 10, and again your new critical path is 1, 3 to 6. So understand what your critical path is, the original 1, 2, 5, 6, and manage it very carefully, ensuring that you're doing everything in your power to ensure each and every one of those tasks complete on schedule or ahead of schedule. Understand what your near critical path tasks are and manage them carefully, because a very small change to any of the tasks that are near the critical path can put them onto the critical path, and then you can't ignore the non-critical path tasks. The path of 1 to 4 is 7. There's a considerable amount of slack in that particular path, but that doesn't mean you should ignore task 4. If it goes from 4 days to 6 days, still doesn't affect the critical path, but by going from 4 days to 6 days, your team member has spent 2 more days on that task. Therefore, the cost for that task will have gone up by the value of 2 days. Therefore, the total budget for your project will go up as well. So critical path is a most effective tool that you have to ensure that you're going to meet your project end date. Understand your critical path, manage the critical path. Understand the near critical path, watch those carefully, and then monitor and review the non-critical path tasks to ensure that through mismanagement they don't become critical path tasks, or through not manage them well, their time doesn't go up, and in fact the budget itself for the project goes up. Understanding the critical path for a very simple project like this, which only has 3 paths and a limited number of tasks, is very simple to do. If you have a large complex project with hundreds of tasks, with dozens, 50, 60 dependencies, going through manually calculating the critical path would be a very difficult task. The good news is your project management software, your Microsoft project, will calculate the critical path for you and present the critical path in a graphical representation. To understand which tasks are on the near critical path, your project management software will also do a calculation for you, which will determine a value called slack. And the closer the slack value for each task is to 0, because tasks on the critical path will have a slack of 0, the closer to 0 the slack for a task is. In this original instance, task 3 would have a slack of only 1, means they're on the near critical path, and the farther the slack is, in this case the slack would be 5, the difference from 7 to 12, identifies that they are not near the critical path and therefore need to be managed appropriately. The next step to developing an effective project schedule is ensure you have proper resource leveling, ensuring you have the optimal team size for your project. What is the optimal team size? Is the optimal team size 2, 5, 25, 250? There are a number of mathematical models. The COCOMO model, which is a well-published estimating guide, has a number of models, mathematical models, that based on duration will help you determine what the optimal project duration will be, or actually effort will help you determine duration, as well as effort will help you determine optimal team size. It's a mathematical model. It's based on years of research and years of project delivery experience factored into the mathematical model. You may choose to use those to determine your optimal team size, or you may simply choose to use a gut check, expert opinion as to what the optimal team size. If you have a small project being delivered over a short duration, having a very large team is probably not effective. Having a large team on a short duration project means you have learning curve, means you have the ramp up, ramp down time for multiple resources, which will probably result in a underutilization of the overall resources. You'll spend as much or more time on ramp up, ramp down, and training as you will in actual project delivery. So your team size needs to be based on the overall duration for your project. Your team size also needs to be based on the number of independent work packages. How many different team members can you truly have working independently, that they're not dependent on each other, that they're not waiting for one to finish a task before the next one can get the predecessor-successor relationship resolved so they can start on the next task. So there's a number of considerations that you have to bring into play to determine what the optimal team size will be. The key is focus on getting the optimal team size. The next step, and probably the most critical step to proper resource leveling to developing an effective project schedule, is that you have full or near full utilization of each and every team member on your project. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at a very simple graph, and on the bottom of the graph we have time. Whether this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, whether this is week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, or month 1, month 2, month 3, month 4, is going to depend on the size of your project and the duration of your project. Up here we're going to have effort, and this is team member effort. And you're going to have a bar at some point in time, which is the optimal utilization for your team member, week in, week out, day in, day out. If you're working on a day-by-day basis, this number is going to be 8. or the reduction of 8 based on the utilization that we talked about earlier. So it's down to 7.6 hours per day. If you're dealing on a week basis, it's going to be 40, or again, the appropriate reduction down to 35 hours of available time for the team member. Or if you're working on a month basis, it's going to be 22 average days per month, or again, reduced to the appropriate number of 18.5 available days for your project per unit of time, day, week, month. And then you're going to look at each individual team member's utilization. And if you have a team member that's flowing along at or about the effective level, that's good team utilization. But if you have a team member who's spiking, that starts off effectively used and then ramps up and becomes way overutilized, is working overtime and then drops off and is working only part-time for a period of the project and then ramps back up and ramps down and is a very spiky, very uncontrolled, if I can use that term, utilization, then that is not proper utilization of your resource. You want your resources at or about the proper utilization level, the 7.6, the 35, the 18.5, the proper availability of the resource to work on your project, and you want the actual graph of their assignment to tasks throughout your project very near to that bar. It doesn't have to match the bar perfectly. It will be virtually impossible to match that bar perfectly, as you will have periods of unavailability due to resource dependencies. You'll have various other issues. Team members may have pre-assigned vacation time and so on. That will make matching the team utilization to the optimal bar impractical, but you want it as close as possible. I believe it's okay to have small periods where they're overutilized to create the project effectively, as long as the overutilizations are balanced by periods of underutilization. That's not saying I'm expecting the team member to work 2 hours of overtime today and knock off 2 hours early tomorrow. That just means on average this will work out that the team member is working on a fully utilized level, and I'm not going to agonize over trying to balance it perfectly. But what I don't want are extended periods of overutilization. This does mean overtime. You should not be building overtime into your project plan. And this means unavailable time. The team member is sitting at their desk, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for work to arrive, waiting for a predecessor task to complete so that they can start their next task. Unproductive use of time, going to consume project budget, and can be demoralizing and very disruptive to overall team spirit. If they see a team member sitting there playing solitaire on their PC, twiddling their thumbs, talking on their phone, interacting with other team members who are busy, this can be very demoralizing and not effective team utilization. So again, focus on full utilization. Try to get your team members to that bar or as close to that bar as possible, and ensure that you have an optimal team size based on the duration of your project, based on the number of interdependencies on your project schedule, to eliminate these periods of underutilization. And if you follow all of these principles, you'll have a good, solid project schedule that will deliver the project in the optimal time frame available. Once you have an effective schedule defined for your project, the next step is to manage it, to control it, to keep it current, to keep it accurate, to keep it reflective of the current project status. The only way to do that is to effectively, diligently manage the progress on each and every task on the project. The only way to do that is to get weekly status from each team member. And on that weekly status from each team member, you want to know by task, how much time this week, and how much to go. You need weekly status. You need weekly status from each team member. You need weekly status from each team member for each task that they're working on that week. You need to know how much time they spent on the task that week, and you need to know how much time is remaining. I've deliberately repeated myself because this is very important. You need weekly status at that level of detail to allow you to effectively monitor and control your project status. You need that detail information to allow you to track the progress on your project. My experience is when you go to a team member and say, I need this information weekly, I need to know how much time and how much is remaining on each and every task that you worked on this week, you're going to get very large groans. You're going to get the team member saying, oh, you're going to take so much time. I should be working on project deliverables. I shouldn't be producing status for you. My experience is uniformly you're going to get that response from your team members. It's your job as a team member to stand up to those moans. It's your job to ensure that you're getting the information that you need to track the progress for the project. You need to tell the team members they have to provide this information to you. They need to provide how much time they spend on each task, and they need to provide their best estimate for the remaining work to be done by task. Team members are going to say, but this is going to take hours of time. You're going to take 4 or 5 hours out of my work week just to provide your weekly status report. And unfortunately, the first week they do your status, it probably will take them hours of time to produce that detailed weekly status report. They're going to sit there, they're going to scratch their head, and they're going to say, I don't remember how much time I spent on Monday. I don't remember what I was working on Monday. I'm not sure I remember Monday. It's going to take a while for that first weekly status report at the level of detail that you need to be produced. The second week is going to be a little better. It's not going to take many hours. It may take an hour. The third week, it may take an hour again, but by the fourth or fifth week, it's down to taking a reasonable amount of time. They're going to produce the weekly status report for you in 15 to 20 minutes. I've been producing weekly status reports in my career for over 20 years. I can produce a weekly status report at this level of detail in approximately 5 minutes. At the end of every day, I take a minute and I jog down in my timer, in my Outlook, exactly what I worked on and how much time I spent on each task. At the end of the week, I simply go through my Outlook, consolidate those 5 pieces of information, scratch my head and say, how much time do I think is remaining on each of these tasks? And I have my weekly status report done at the appropriate level of detail in 5 to 10 minutes. But it takes experience. It takes discipline. It's going to take some time for your team members to get to that level of discipline where they can produce the weekly status report at the required level of detail in 5 to 10 minutes. But you have to insist on it. Without those facts, without that level of detail, you can't effectively manage the project. And when I say facts, I mean facts. You want to know the actual time, the actual remaining. But you don't need it to the second. You don't need it to the minute. You don't need it to the quarter hour. You probably don't need it to the half hour. If they simply tell you they spent 6 hours on task A and 8 hours on task B and 12 hours on task C, that's detailed enough. That is factual enough. You don't need to know that it's 12 hours, 6 minutes, and 32 seconds. So you don't want them agonizing over the minutes and the quarter hours. Provide the details at the rounded hour, and it's close enough. That, again, helps accelerate the time if they know that you're happy with hours and that the hours are absolutely based on the best facts they have at hand. It's close enough. So insist on weekly status, insist on how much time per week, insist on how much time remaining per task at an hour level, not at a quarter or a half hour level, and within 2 to 3 weeks the moaning and groaning will stop, and within 2 to 3 weeks you will be getting the information that you need to track the progress on your project. Once you get that detailed weekly status from your team members, you need to use that to update the project plan. Take those facts, the actuals, and the estimate to complete, the ETC, and put that into your software. on a team member by team member, on a task by task basis. You're going to update your project plan, your Microsoft project plan. You're going to put the actuals and the remaining estimate to complete into the plan, and you're going to allow the plan to recalculate what your project dates are. It's going to recalculate when each milestone is going to complete, and it's going to recalculate what your new project finish date is going to be. You need to be prepared that when you take the facts and you update the project plan, that the results may not be exactly what you want. When you take the facts and you allow the team members to give you revised ETCs, and these revised ETCs are based on what they honestly believe is going to take them to complete their task, it may change the project finish date. But that's what schedule control is all about. Taking the facts, understanding what impact the facts are going to have on the schedule, and then taking the appropriate actions as a project manager to deal with the facts. If based on this revised information, my project is going to complete 2 days, 3 days, 4 days later than originally planned, then you as a project manager need to act on that information and do what you can do to improve the project situation. We'll deal with that in just a moment. The next step to schedule control is integrating changes. In the last series of nuggets, we talked about implementing an effective change management system. We talked about identifying, documenting, and having all changes to our project approved. When those approved changes have schedule impacts, when those approved changes increase the time, add new tasks to the project, you need to integrate the changes. Again, you need to take those approved changes, focus being the approved changes, and again, update the project plan. Add the approved changes into your approved project schedule and update that, and use that to again forecast the finish date. You need to take all of the information you have at hand based on the actual facts that you have at hand for week 1, week 2, week 12, week 25 of your project, and manage the facts that you have at hand based on the actuals you have from your team, based on the integrated and approved changes from the project change management system. Manage that against your project baseline and take the appropriate project management actions to report on project status, to take the appropriate project management actions to improve the project delivery situation. As a result of the work you did during project control, as a result of tracking the actuals and entering the revised ETCs, it's entirely possible that your project is forecasting a later finish date than originally planned. It's time to start to look at what techniques we can apply to compress the schedule. It's time to start looking at what techniques we can apply to try to improve the project end date. These compression techniques can be categorized as fast tracking and crashing. Fast tracking says, what can I do to do it faster? So what can you do to do it faster? Can you change dependencies? If you look at the various dependencies you have in your network, if you say that C is dependent on B and E is dependent on D, are those in fact true mandatory dependencies? Again, when we were originally setting up the dependencies, I told you to focus on mandatory dependencies, but are they true mandatory dependencies? Based on the additional information that you have at hand now that your project is well into delivery mode, are these in fact true dependencies, or can I remove some of the dependencies? And if in fact they are still true dependencies, maybe you can introduce lags. Maybe it will be possible to start D 3 or 4 or 5 days earlier than C was originally scheduled to complete. So you're going to look at what you can do to fast track. You're going to look at what you can do to do it faster. You're going to look at changing the dependencies, removing dependencies, or adding lag times, or lead times rather, to the dependency network to allow some tasks to start faster. Another thing you can look to do to fast track, can you add resources? If you add extra resources to your project and reassign some tasks to the new resources, does that improve the project delivery end date? If you add resources and start to add resources to specific tasks, so instead of having resource number 1 working exclusively on a task, maybe you can add a peer, a buddy to that task, and complete the task faster. Adding resources does not always improve the project delivery situation. Sometimes adding resources will actually change the end date in an unfavorable direction because of the amount of extra interaction, because of extra dependencies. So again, techniques for fast tracking, changing dependencies, adding lead times to dependencies, adding resources may be an effective way to do schedule compression, but doesn't always result in success. Crashing, what can you do to change the environment? Can I add more tools? If I add some productivity tools, if I change the environment within which my team is working, can they do things faster? Adding tools may in fact be a great way to crash the project. But what is the learning curve for the tools? The second I implement the tools into my project, will I in fact get schedule compression, or will there be a learning curve? Will my team get over the learning curve fast enough to achieve the benefits for the tools? Can I in fact change the estimates? And I'm not talking about changing the ETCs that the team member provided, but if you look further out into the project, if you look at tasks that haven't been started, based on the history the project is having, based on the history of success your team members are having, is it realistic to change some estimates of some future tasks? But do this honestly. Do this. I truly, honestly believe that if I reduce the estimate for these future tasks, this reduced, revised estimate is in fact the likely estimate that will be produced, as opposed to just blindly changing the estimates now to produce a more favorable finish date, only to have the estimates rechanged by the team members when they're working on the tasks through the revised ETCs back to the original date, back to possibly even a more pessimistic finish date. So as you're delivering your project and you're encountering project delivery challenges, you need to look at schedule compression. You need to look at fast tracking. What can I do to do it faster? You'll need to look at crashing. What can I do to change the environment? Can I add tools? Can I change the way the project is being delivered? Can I in fact change estimates? The key to looking at schedule compression, the key to looking at fast tracking and crashing, is it needs to focus on critical path tasks. If you fast track a task that is not on the critical path, if you change the dependencies and allow a non-critical path task to start earlier or to overlap, it will have zero impact on the new finish date because it's not on the critical path. If you crash tasks, if you change the environment for tasks that are not on the critical path, again, it's going to have zero impact on the finish date. So as you're looking at schedule compression, it goes back again to understanding the critical path and focus your fast tracking, focus your crashing on the tasks that are going to impact the finish date. And those are the tasks that are on the critical path.
This concludes our second nugget on project time management. The first nugget on project time management was all about developing a solid schedule. The planning activities that go into creating a solid schedule. This nugget was focused exclusively on the execution aspect, or controlling the schedule. Making sure that we have a good schedule from planning and that we manage that good schedule. In this nugget, we looked at the techniques of making sure that the schedule is good by having good resource loading in place. Making it a realistic schedule. We examine the critical path techniques that we can use to effectively manage the schedule and to look at options for improving the schedule. We looked at maintaining the facts, the actual effort from the team member, and the revised estimates to complete from the team member. We looked at taking all of that information, taking it back into our software to ensure that we still have a good, realistic schedule, realizing that taking those facts may make modifications or may change the end dates. If the project is going well, taking that information and building it into the schedule may improve or shorten our end dates. If the project is having challenge, and let's face it, a lot of projects will have challenges, it's going to result in an extension of the end dates. We would then look at the critical path and examine methods that we have to improve that, of fast tracking and crashing the tasks, and only the tasks on the critical path, to try to improve our project delivery scenario. Effectively controlling the schedule is going to give you the information as a project manager that you need to be able to define to management, to be able to predict your project's end dates and therefore your project's likelihood of successful conclusion.
This concludes our nugget on project schedule management. I hope this video has been informative for you, and thank you very much for viewing.